Good evening, everyone. I am Janika White. I am an attorney. I've been practicing for about 15 years, and I'm also on your Memphis City Council. I'm going to allow each one of our guests to give a quick introduction. To my left, we have Attorney DeJuan Settle, Attorney Camila Turner, and Attorney Brian Mounts. And I'm going to let each one of them tell you a little bit about themselves.
Again, you heard my name is DeJuan Settle. I'm an attorney here in the city of Memphis. I've been practicing law since 92, about 32 years. I'm a native Memphian, born and raised here, graduated from White Station High School in 82, and went to University of Tennessee, Knoxville, went to Southern University's law school. And I practice primarily criminal law and personal injury and wrongful death law. And got to throw it in, I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, I got to say that, you know. You'll be all right.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Camila Turner, and I practice criminal defense in Memphis. I'm born and raised in Memphis. I'm always excited and happy to be on the campus of LeMoyne-Owen College. My parents met right here on the campus of LeMoyne-Owen College. My mother was Miss LeMoyne-Owen College, 1963. I see Miss LeMoyne sitting here in the front. But like I said, I'm from Memphis. I went to undergrad at Xavier University in New Orleans, and I went to law school at the University of Memphis, the Cecil C. Humphrey School of Law at the University of Memphis. I represent juveniles now, but I've mostly represented adults most of my career. But I'm glad to be here to share this information with you all this evening.
Hi, everybody. My name's Brian Mounts. It's an honor to be here and be with everybody else. I'm from Memphis. I went to Lausanne and graduated in 2011. I went to Rhodes for undergrad. I then studied at the London School of Economics in Oxford in England for a master's degree. And I was a Blake West Scholar at Tulane University Law School. I was a federal defender doing federal criminal defense, and then I was special counsel to the Attorney General. And now I'm practicing at Birch Porter and Johnson here. And I do mostly federal criminal defense and constitutional law.
Oh, I forgot to say that I did, I think 4 semesters here at LeMoyne as an adjunct professor in the criminal justice department. I think. Yeah. So, yeah.
So, you all know why we're here. You all have heard that the National Guard is on their way to Memphis. And these are clearly unprecedented times. We have never seen anything like what is happening right now in this city, but as well as the country. And so first, we're going to start off with Brian Mounts telling us a little bit about the National Guard and kind of how we were even able to get here so that you can have an educational background of the constitutional law and how the National Guard is able to come to the city of Memphis.
See if it's perfect. Even a little loud. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect. So, and I brought my pocket constitution so everyone can see, and this is just sort of going to be a walk down history lane for the most part. The way the National Guard sort of fomented and began its bedrock was in the origins of the militia. Many of you know that we fought the British and became our own nation, and each state had its own military, and that was cause for contention. When the states came together to form the United States, there was a lot of issues preceding that. First, we had numerous rebellions. Shays' Rebellion was a very famous example, another fight against taxation. And the United States found that it did not have the ability to basically quell an uprising. So it had to create some kind of actual military, a cohesive, centralized military. But the states still would have the ability to have their own militia. This is sort of a back and forth. Many of you will know great figures like Alexander Hamilton, who was a Federalist and believed in the centralization of the military. And others of you might know Thomas Jefferson, not quite an anti-Federalist, but borderline, who believed in what's later codified as states' rights. The Constitution gives enumerated powers to the federal government. One of those in Article 1 That's Congress's power, Congress's box. And Congress has the ability to tax us and raise a military. But it leaves the power of the militia to the states. And this can sort of be seen later. You know, the Constitution is written and then ratified later, and the Bill of Rights is then ratified in 1791 afterward. And the Bill of Rights, I'm sure many of you have heard of, there's the Third Amendment, which is you don't have to house soldiers at your home. So if the Navy comes knocking, I know they're in Millington, but they cannot just come and stay at your house. Okay, that's illegal under the Constitution, under the Third Amendment. And the 10th Amendment says, all right, everything in this little book, this is the extent of the federal government's powers. They can't do anything past that. That's it. And the 10th Amendment says everything else goes to the states. The National Guard continues this way. They're basically state militias. In 1903, this changes under the Dixon Act, or the Militia Act of 1903. And we end up getting different titles, okay? There's Title 32 and Title 10. These are sort of the actual federal statutes that allow the National Guard and create the National Guard the way we will begin to notice and recognize it today. So let's start with Title 10. Title 10 is the full federal authorization of the National Guard. That means that it's all at the president's helm. The president is the commander-in-chief, and that's his power and his domain under the Constitution. Title 32 is a weird hybridization. It is effectively saying that the federal government or the Secretary of State can help determine if there's an issue, and then the governor can acquiesce and help move forward anything there. So really it's a combination of the state and the feds. Normally, what would happen is that the National Guard or the State Guard is under entirely state control. So Title 32 allows the president and the governor to move forward with that. And I just want to talk, I'll try to be very quick and move forward through everything. There are Tennessee laws that discuss the National Guard too, and a few cases that are famous in Tennessee. Now, one of those things that is uber important is the Tennessee Constitution, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. And the Tennessee Constitution explicitly says the governor cannot send out the National Guard except for in cases of rebellion or invasion and things of that nature. And have any of you heard of Boss Crump? Do any of y'all know who that is? Okay. He was like essentially a mafia boss in Memphis in the early 1900s. And he retained power when he was a mayor and when he wasn't. Some argue that he may have rigged elections to stay in. I'm not here to say he did or didn't. The governor was not super thrilled. Boss Crump had a deal with basically black communities to help keep him in power, and the governor was pissed. So the governor in 1939 manufactured a way to rig Shelby County's elections to try to say that there was some form of invasion and to quell different kinds of uprising. And the courts said, Tennessee Constitution says you can't do that, okay? You're wilding out here. You can't do that. That's against the Tennessee Constitution. So that's sort of the backdrop of Tennessee's part. I want to talk about explicitly under Title 32. It allows for training and movement of National Guards. It allows the governor to help with the feds to do that. And there's also a section, I'm going to read, it's supposed to be when it's not used for natural disaster, which I think will be talked about in a moment, homeland defense activity. And it's defined, I'm going to read it for you all so I don't mess anything up. It means an activity undertaken for the military protection of the territory or domestic population of the United States, or of the infrastructure or other assets of the United States determined by the Secretary of Defense as being critical to national security from a threat or aggression against the United States. So that's the definition. I'll talk briefly. Normally, what happens is that a president might do what's called an executive order. An executive order is a notice, almost like an email, to all other federal agencies to say, hey, get your act together, start doing something. And that's what he actually did in D.C. for the National Guard. Ours is a very peculiar difference. He actually released a memorandum, which is very rarely done. A memorandum is not essentially a legal binding document. When a president issues an executive order that's illegal or an overstep of presidential power, you can sue the president. The same way you can sue the governor to stop that. That's one of the wonderful things about our Constitution. Under Article 3, the Supreme Court can determine that. A memorandum is not really a declaration of law. It's really an understanding. So we sort of lose that ability to challenge it on that front. I want to take away, though, the National Guard one might have an ambivalent feeling about the history of it. And I want to leave you all with a very important time. So that time in 1939 for the elections and for Boss Crump was one example of it being misused. But it also has been used in other contexts. Some of you might be familiar with Brown v. Board of Education. That was a deployment under Title X where the feds completely controlled it against the authority of the governor of Arkansas. That was a time of mobilization that controversially, the president said that it was needed. And there were attempted legal arguments against that. So I want you all to think it is, even though all of us have feelings about it, the legality and legal issues are complicated. The less complicated part is the Tennessee law, which is, in my opinion, very clear.
Very clear, just very clear that
The same way the federal government has certain powers where, for example, the president is the executive. Okay, he doesn't get to make the law. Congress makes the law. The governor is limited similarly by the Tennessee Constitution. And the governor has to have basically consent of the legislature to declare anything an actual emergency, because under the Tennessee Constitution, you actually cannot just send troops unless it is for rebellion or invasion. So the governor's overstepping his authority and going against the Tennessee Constitution and Tennessee law, in my understanding.
Thank you. And so what I want to move to next, and thank you so much, Attorney Mounts, for that background. What I want to move to next is, although we've been very, the attention has been on the National Guard. The reality is the National Guard has not even made it to Memphis, yet we have seen an increase in police presence. We have over 120 additional Tennessee Highway patrolmen on the streets. We see an increase in other agencies, the FBI, DEA, ATF, Homeland Security, ICE. And so I'm going to have Attorney Camila Turner talk about some of the experiences she's already had and tell you a little bit about some of the agencies that are already here and the increase in law enforcement in our community.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Attorney White. Yes, so I practice primarily right now in juvenile court, and I've seen already an influx, a tremendous amount of agencies involved in a regular traffic stop. And if you all have been driving around the city of Memphis in the past weeks or so, I'm sure you too have noticed a larger police presence and a larger presence of people being pulled over on the side of the road. And what I would like to say to you all, especially as a group of young people, do everything you can to not give the police a reason to pull your car over. So meaning your car itself, if you have a headlight or a tail light that's out, go ahead and get that fixed. If you have tint on your car and you're not sure whether it's too dark, get it checked out, and maybe you may want to consider, if you know your tint is dark, is taking it off. They are pulling cars over for any and every reason. Today I had a case, they said that the person wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and it ended up in being a very horrendous situation, guns, 10, 20 different agencies descending on one person, and this is about 6 blocks from here, not even that. And this was on yesterday. So they're here, and they are very aggressive with how they are dealing with citizens. So your registration, make sure that your tags are current on your car. And I know that there is an issue with the clerk's office now with getting tags and registration. So maybe just Uber if you got bad tags. ride with a friend with some good tags. You know, it's not worth it. It's very, very serious. And when it comes to pulling a car over, it's much different than the authority to search a home. When it comes to pulling a car over on the street, they will come up with any and every excuse to pull a car over if they want to. Now, I know that my most recent client was pulled over because there were 4 young black men in a Chrysler 300. That's why they were pulled over. But he can't say that. He has to say, I couldn't see that he was wearing a seatbelt, or you changed lanes without signaling, or I've heard some of everything made up about the reason why they pull a car over. So that's why it's so important to make sure that you are doing everything you can do to be in compliance with the law. I know this is Tennessee. I know that our gun laws are very, very, very lax in the state of Tennessee. However, what I also know is authorities react differently to people with dark skin, with black and brown people who have guns. Your gun may be legal. You may have registration. You go to the gun range. I think you need to reconsider carrying a gun in this time. I just want you to be safe. And I can talk to you about the Fourth Amendment search and seizure laws. I could talk to you about probable cause and reasonable suspicion, but none of that really matters when your life is in jeopardy. And I want you to be safe. And I can also talk about what the law is, but what I know and what I've seen, especially throughout my career and especially in the past week, is that they are pulling people over left and right for any and every reason. So don't give them any more reason to arrest you. So I'll stop right there.
And so in terms of some of the agencies that you've seen, tell us some of those agencies. And then right after that, we're going to jump to Attorney Settle and then kind of bounce back and forth, because I do want them to know what those rights are.
Yes.
So tell us about some of the agencies that are here, what they seem to be focusing on, and then we're going to start talking about how they should respond in the event that they encounter law enforcement.
Yes, so state troopers. So normally if you're driving from Memphis to Nashville or wherever, you see state troopers on the highway, okay? We're used to that. Sometimes they're like hiding in the cut to catch people speeding. So now the state troopers are in the neighborhood. State troopers are at Trigg and Lauderdale. State troopers are at Mississippi and Walker. I've never seen anything like it. I'm not used to seeing state troopers in the neighborhood. So the past couple of cases that I had, the stops were initiated by state troopers in residential areas. So the state troopers will pull them over, and then they will immediately call all the other agencies. I don't know if they are all on the same system where they get the call now. I'm not sure how that works, but the FBI, the Sheriff's Department, Memphis Police, Homeland Security, agencies I have never heard of that I didn't even know existed. I mean, everybody. ATF, people that you're only used to hearing about when you're talking about federal government and federal law. All of these agencies are in Memphis now. And what used to be a stop that would be one person pulled over, maybe they'll call for backup, maybe it's 1 or 2 cars. Now it's 30 cars on the scene. Helicopters. On Monday, I had a case, a suspected stolen car. They had a helicopter in the air. So I think a lot of it is they're here and they don't have anything to do. So they say, if you get a call, just call everybody and we'll all show up. And that's very dangerous because they don't really have the training. They don't know how to handle people, to deal with people. They're not used to making citizens arrests, a lot of these agencies. And I often think about what happened with Tyree Nichols. And I just don't want anything like that to ever happen again. And I think that with all of these agencies here, it's ripe for something like that. So that's why I want everybody to be diligent and aware of what's going on.
So we know that at this point in time that, that we have a lot of different agencies, and like you said, a lot of it consists of stops. I will tell you that there have been a lot of reports of law enforcement going out and executing warrants as well. So people who have warrants. One thing I've been making sure that I tell church members and everyone is to make sure if you're driving that you have a valid driver's license. Always get you some insurance. You need some insurance. Get you some uninsured motorists too. That has nothing to do with the National Guard. It's just good practice to have both. But in terms of stops, let's talk about, you said I can tell you about reasonable suspicion. I can tell you about probable cause. Those are probably terms that a lot of these young people have never heard before. So if you all could just, and which whoever wants to hop in here, Attorney Settle, we hadn't heard from you yet, so if you want to hop in here, this is a good place. Tell us a little bit about reasonable suspicion, probable cause, what the police can and can't do when in that first encounter.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that's important. Let me start by telling you that the goal in every contact with law enforcement should be for you to get home. That's the first thing. I tell all of my clients this, two things. First, there's a difference between what we understand as right and wrong and what the law is. And as black people, we assume that justice and right and wrong is built into the law. That's not necessarily the case. The law is concerned about the outcome of the process. So don't get it confused. You can know your rights and still run afoul of the law. And if you run afoul of the law, you end up in a situation where you may or may not come home. If you are lucky and you don't come home, you go to jail. That's not a good outcome, but you're not dead. And that's the outcome that everybody wants to avoid. That's kind of the point of this conversation this evening. Now, you have a right to remain silent. If an officer asks you for your name or someone from the Guard, anybody in law enforcement, and these National Guard troops are essentially being marshalized to be law enforcement officers. If they ask you for your name, you do not have to give your name. You have a right to remain silent. You cannot be arrested for remaining silent. If they ask you for your ID, you don't have to have an ID. If you have it, my advice is to give it to them, but you don't have to say anything. You cannot, if you give them a fake one, you're going to jail. That's illegal. You'll be charged for that. You cannot give them a fake name. If you give them a name, make sure it's your name. But make sure that you comply more than anything else. You do not have to, if they tell you they want to take your phone from, if you're filming them arresting someone else, they don't have a right to take your phone from you. They can't go through it without a warrant. If they got a warrant, then they can take your phone. If they have a warrant, they can go through your phone. You do not, you correct me on this, in some circumstances you don't have to surrender your password. But make sure that if you are filming or videoing them doing something, there's a halo rule. You got to be at least 25 feet away in the state of Tennessee. You got to be at least 25 feet away from it. You get within that space, you're subject to arrest. Now, unfortunately, what that means is the officer gets to make that call. That kind of brings us to probable cause and reasonable suspicion. Probable cause can be almost anything the officer declares it to be. In other words, let's say you're riding down the street, officer wants to pull you over, says you fail to make a right turn or fail to signal to turn, fail to signal when you change lanes, or they smell marijuana coming from your car. Well, unfortunately, they get to stop you to say that that's what happened, whether or not it's true. And then there's a process you have to go through in order for it to be determined whether or not there's any validity to the stop. A lot of times the purpose of the stop is to invoke a search. They want to try to search a vehicle. My position on this, and I don't know how wise it is in today's environment, I've never been pulled over and asked, nobody's ever asked to search my car, but if they did, I've always felt like what I would say is, what probable cause can you articulate in order to search my car? Why do you want to search my car? You have to have a reason for it. Well, I think I smell weed. There's no weed in here. There's no weed in my car. I have nothing illegal going on in my car. You don't have a right to search my car without a warrant. Then they're going to say, well, we'll go get the dogs. Go get the dogs. Make them go through every process that they threaten you with. You know, I do not advise you to get belligerent because that they will say and do things that may cause you to feel triggered by some of their behavior. Just don't react to it. You have a right to exercise your rights, but be wise in exercising your rights. I think there was something you wanted me to talk about probable cause as well. Probable cause usually. Yeah, you can definitely say no to a search. If you're riding in the car with, you know, Junebug, and Junebug's gotten in some trouble, and they have a reason to, if he's got a warrant or something like that, he produces his ID and turns out he's got a warrant, that may create a situation if he's driving. I don't want to get too much into the details of why they could do it, but if he's driving and it's his car, they may be able to search it. And so now you're sitting on the curb in handcuffs. They're going to say they're doing this for officer safety, and you're, you know, waiting until they search this car. They can pat you down for officer safety. So when they start to pat you down, you know, don't feel like your rights are being violated. They can pat you down. But many other things they have to have a warrant to do in terms of probable cause and that sort of thing. Yeah, that's exactly right. They have to have reasonable suspicion that a crime has taken place or is taking place in order for them to pat you down.
I just wanted to follow up and say, never consent to a search of anything. Your house, your car, your backpack, anything, never consent. Now, they may do it anyway. They may go and get a judge to sign a warrant. That's fine, but never consent. You're just giving up your rights and making it easy for them to do what they want to do. And another thing I have to reiterate, because everybody hears it, we all know it, but when it comes to putting this in practice, people have such a hard time doing it. So finish this. You have a right to remain. I plead the, exactly. The Fifth Amendment means you have a right to remain silent. For some reason, we all know that when they get in the room, in the office with the detective, and that box of chicken or hot fries or whatever they give them to drink, people just start singing. But you have a right to remain silent at every point. At no point do you lose that right. You have that right on the street. You have that right when you are in custody. You have that right when you are at trial. You have a right to remain silent. I spend so much time trying to suppress statements, trying to convince a judge to throw out a statement that my client has made when all he had to do was be quiet. All she had to do was say, I want a lawyer. And so always remember that, because that's one of the most important rights that we have as American citizens, and we all know it, but we don't always use it. So just always remember that, and tell your friends, if you have children, tell them. Young people especially are especially vulnerable to authority, and often give statements, and a lot of times false statements. Janika and I had a case of a young man, a student at Fairleigh, who confessed to a murder that he knew absolutely nothing about. And he was in jail for over a year before he finally was able to get out, because they had convinced him to confess to this murder. So it's very important, and I always have to say that anytime I'm speaking to people, especially young people.
Attorney Mounts, you got anything to add to any of those reasonable suspicion probable cause?
I think that they've done a good job. I'll just say, you know, reasonable suspicion, they can pull you over for not putting on your turn signal. A step above that is probable cause. They smell marijuana in your vehicle. There's different levels to these things. I have slightly different, just insofar as, yes, you can tell an officer you can't search my car. Always tell them no, and especially when it's your home. There are very special protections for your home. The one thing, though, I would be careful about being obviously too belligerent or saying no to too many search parts. 2 reasons. One, there's a federal statute that you can sue officers for violating your Fourth Amendment right. That's the search and seizure part. It's 1983. You can sue them for breaking your constitutional right. Okay, the one thing you cannot ever get back, and I impress as Attorney Turner had said, please do not talk to them about any issues at all. It only will ever hurt you. It will only ever hurt you. I've never seen a good scenario where somebody has first talked to the cops. Not, and I don't want to say that they're hunting for things, but that's their job, okay? I would implore you, self-incrimination, the Fifth Amendment exists for a reason. Officers are not your friend or your enemy. They're there to do a job, okay? But you have rights as a citizen of the United States, and you have to remember that one critical piece. As I'm sure all of us have seen, so many of our cases and work have fallen. It's like the sword of Damocles hanging above you. That albatross is there. Do not speak with them. Okay, wait for your attorney to come. You'll get better things being honest and talking with authorities later, but wait for your attorney to come. I think that's the only thing I would add.
The other thing, just kind of add on to that, is what police will do sometimes if there's multiple people riding in the car, they'll separate you and just ask simple questions. Where you going? Where were you headed? What time did you leave? If the stories don't match completely, you just create a reasonable suspicion. And that reasonable suspicion can now rise to probable cause. And so just be careful. That's why, I used to tell my kids this all the time. Very few people get into trouble for what they don't say. A lot of people get into trouble for what they do say. So just be quiet. It's the easiest thing to do. Just, you have a right to do it, and nobody can force you, like they just said. Now, and when I mean nobody, if you get in front of a judge is going to say this 100 times. You have a right to remain silent. You don't have to say or do anything. If you go to jury trial, they will tell the jury you don't have to testify. So don't say anything in the very beginning, and you may not end up in the situation in the end.
So I have a couple of other things I wanted us to get into, kind of maybe isolated in those things, but I thought this would be a good point where we've gone over kind of the basics and a good foundation. We were really curious to know what questions you all had about what was going on. So we're going to open it up to the audience. I see President Davis with his hand held high. Yes, sir.
I just need some clarity on something Attorney Sutter mentioned. This whole 25 feet halo business. So if I'm in my car and the officer approaches and I'm filming and he approaches my car, how is the 25 feet from the airport? I didn't violate the 25 feet. He or she did.
You're absolutely right. I mean, but you would nonetheless be in violation because he closed the space. Halo still exists. I mean, it still has to exist, still has to be there. You can't really get out of your car to widen that gap. And he's going to ask you, stop filming. He's going to say that.
And one thing that I will add about the HALO law is that the officer has to state it. So it's not something that you have to measure or say. They have to make it known that they believe that you're in violation of the 25 feet distance.
And understand this, when it comes to protecting your constitutional rights and making sure you get home safely, the flaw in some of this is that we assume that we're going to be encountering well-trained, disciplined officers. I think a lot of times that's a mistake. Now, I know a lot of police officers personally, and they're very professional, and they're serious about the job they do, but we're not talking about them. If 90% of them are great, it's the 10% that are the problem. So just know that you don't know who's walking up to your car. You don't know who you're encountering when they encounter you.
I'll just say, on top of it, that dash cams and cameras on your vehicle are your friend. That's all.
And officers now have body-worn cameras. This is something that started, I think, a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a half in Memphis, and they have been very, very helpful. Now, we also know that they will turn them off. They will manipulate them in different ways, but most agencies do have body cameras, and we also have sky cameras in certain places in the city, and that was the reason that we knew what happened with Tyree Nichols, because there was a sky camera. So cameras have been very, very helpful in combating injustice, but if you want to film yourself and you're having an interaction with authorities, I would say you don't want to give them any reason to say, I thought they were reaching for a gun. So if you have a camera that's mounted, then I think that's much safer than you trying to hold something and film.
I wanted to make sure that we talked about the right to remain silent, right to say you don't consent. Really quickly, let's talk about the right to an attorney, because they need to always ask, am I being detained? Remember that. Am I being detained? Am I under arrest? If not, that means that you're free to leave. Of course, never run. And even when, they approach you, don't run. We've said don't run, don't lie. You have the right to remain silent, but it is a criminal offense to provide a false name or false identification. But let's talk about the right to an attorney. So let's say they say, yes, you have been detained. You are under arrest. You have a right to remain silent, and you have a right to an attorney. You want to talk about that?
If for any reason, I know you all would not be arrested, you find college students, but sometimes it happens. You want to say specifically, I want a lawyer. I've had cases in the past, one in particular, where my client said, if I am under arrest, I want a lawyer. If I am under arrest, I want a lawyer. And it was undisputed that he was under arrest. The judge said that he did not invoke his Fifth Amendment right to counsel, his Sixth Amendment right to counsel, I'm sorry. And I was blown away. And his statement, they took a 4-hour statement from him after that. So it has to be very explicit. I want a lawyer. Anything else, do you think I need a lawyer? It's not going to be enough. Should I get a lawyer? Not enough. Y'all got any lawyers? Not enough. You have to say, I want a lawyer. And so that is so important. What was the next part of the question?
That was it.
Okay.
Yeah. We were just kind of going through the right. So I was looking at my little phrases, and then one of them was, I want to speak to a lawyer. I don't consent. Am I under arrest?
One other thing I have to say, because I have had so many issues with this throughout my legal career, stay off the telephone. Stay off. And I know, your mom or grandma or somebody, baby, tell me everything that happened. Just start at the beginning. And you just on the phone telling the whole story, and because they're always recorded. They record every phone call from a penal institution, from a jail, from any detention center. They record every phone call, and when it's time to go to trial, when it's time to have a bond hearing, a lot of prosecutors will ask for those calls, and they'll have an intern to sit up and listen to every single word that you said, and they will play it back in a hearing or a trial, and I've had it happen. And so a lot of times, if somebody calls you from jail or prison and they want to talk and they start talking, I'll say just hang up the phone. Just hang up the phone, because you are incriminating yourself, and that's not confidential information. And so it's very, very important, and I had to say that because I've had that issue time and again over the years.
I will tell you that I have a standing policy in my office whether I'm there or not. If somebody calls my office from the jail, my legal assistant will not even tell me they called. She hangs up the phone immediately because we don't want any problems, because the moment you say anything, now I become a witness. I'm no longer your attorney now. It should be confidential, whatever you say to me otherwise. And please do not do this. Do not be that third party that calls the attorney or anybody else on behalf of somebody from jail, because now you get subpoenaed and you got to testify. You may end up testifying against a loved one because you're on the other end of that phone. The phones are just dead. We got a RICO case coming up next month, or conspiracy case coming up next month. And the only so-called evidence they have on my client is a phone call between two other people that had nothing to do with him. So you could be, and he's been sitting in jail almost 2 years waiting to go to trial on this case. Whether he's innocent or guilty, he still can't beat the jail time that he served already. So just, man, the phone, I know the phones are pretty much attached to y'all like a body part. I've had people get convicted because they can locate you based on your phone. If they get the phone off of your person during the arrest, they're gonna download every picture and text you've ever sent. They've got access to it. So they jailbreak these phones like it's nothing. I don't know how they do it, but they go get everything, emails, text. There's no privacy anymore in the United States, just know that.
Good stuff. All right, did you have anything to add, Attorney Mounts? Yeah. Do we have any questions?
Was there a question on the front row?
Yes. So how can citizens report like misconduct or excessive force when it comes to the National Guard? Because even before they get here, like you guys said, that they already are using excessive force for no reason just by stopping them and pulling them over. I'm not gonna say everyone, but certain officers are already doing that. So when it comes to that, if you don't have the dash cam, like what is the next steps on reporting that, and how do we go about that if it does happen?
So I'll speak to regarding Memphis Police. We have internal affairs. So with the National Guard, I don't know the answer to that. Are you aware of?
The National Guard has their own system that you can report to. Now, you also can send a report to TBI. The one thing is you're much better off truthfully filing a lawsuit, finding a plaintiff's 1983 attorney. I know great ones in Nashville. I'm trying to think of ones here. I don't know, Charles Murray's the only one I can think of who does stuff here. I'm sorry, Murray Wells is who I meant. I'm sorry. Murray Wells. Find it, I mean, you can Google 1983 excessive force attorney, and their attorneys, and they will take your case for free, just so you know. And they'll go after the agency or group. Because the issue with military type things have their own jurisdiction and their own tribunals that they deal with. So you have to circumvent that by actually going into federal court and filing a suit there with an attorney. That was a great question, though. Yeah.
Okay, so question, do they have the same ability that the police have once they get here, or do they have two different strategies?
That's a very good question. The answer is that it's quite controversial. The idea is there's a PAC or an act called the Corus Pos Act, which initially said that you cannot have military troops cannot act as a police power. Police powers are traditionally sovereign over military ones when inside the interior United States. However, when it is moved under Title 32, under the governor's permission, there are times where a governor can deputize the National Guard and make them a police-type force. So that's part of the caboodle and issue with our current part, is that the governor is using them, but as I had said earlier, Tennessee law says you actually can't do that. Even though federal law says that's permissible, states have their own, because of the 10th Amendment, their own laws. So even if federally it says, yeah, Governor Lee or whomever, Governor Pritzker of Illinois has the power to do that, Tennessee says, we as Tennesseans say that we don't believe in that. That's a great question, though, and one that'll undoubtedly, it's already at this time being debated in Illinois. We'll see what ends up happening there.
Well, and I was about to say, in terms of conversations that we've had, it has been understood that they will not have police powers in terms of being able to arrest or even execute warrants like we see happening now. From my understanding and what we've been briefed on, and this is actually not from my lawyer position, this is just, this is what I've been told, is that they will have the ability to detain, but then reach out to one of the law enforcement agencies that does have the ability to conduct arrests.
I think our greater concern is all of these other agencies that are in Memphis already right now. When I was in Washington, D.C., and I saw your president there, we were at the Congressional Black Caucus a couple of weeks ago, and the National Guard people that I saw, the few that I did see, they were not really doing much of anything. They were mostly standing around. So I'm not sure, and I hear they're gonna be gardening, doing miscellaneous things. I don't know, but I know for a fact that the state troopers are on the ground and they are pulling people over in the neighborhoods very aggressively. I know that the FBI is here and they are very aggressive. I know that all of these other agencies are on the ground in Memphis. So I think those are the ones that'll be more of an issue for us than the National Guard. That's my opinion.
And I guess, do you all want to add to, because we did kind of, because I didn't know how we were going to go on time, and I didn't know how many questions you all had, so now we're kind of backtracking a little bit. But I think it would be good, do you all really understand kind of how the National Guard is made up, like who they are? And I'm getting some no's. Can you all enlighten the crowd on, you know, who is the National Guard? And by that, just kind of these are explaining how they end up in the National Guard and kind of explaining the difference between that and actually being in the Army or the Navy, and in what instances are they actually called out?
Here's a little I know. As a general rule, the National Guard is a state-to-state department, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. And most people in whatever state, for example, in Tennessee, most of the people in the National Guard are going to be from the state of Tennessee. So what you have is a volunteer group of individuals who, they get paid, but I mean, they voluntarily sign up for the National Guard and they're acting in their capacity as National Guard, but they're essentially just regular citizens like you and me. And at some point they go to training, and then if they're called out to natural disasters, excuse me, and that sort of thing, then when they're called up, they act. So what you're dealing with is you're dealing with citizens from all over the state of Tennessee, who in this instance will be deployed to the city of Memphis. So just know that you're going to be dealing with people with different cultures. East Tennessee is very different from West Tennessee. Middle Tennessee is very different from both. So just know that you're going to be dealing with personalities that come from different backgrounds, but essentially state citizens who are acting in a military capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones that I've seen this week, even today, I had a case. It was Homeland Security. It was ATF, which is the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. It was Memphis Police and the Sheriff's Department. It was the state troopers. It was Homeland Security, and some other agency. I think there are over 13, what is the number? 13 different agencies that are here, and they are all coming on the same traffic stop. They're all showing up. 20, 30 of them at a time to arrest one teenager for having a bag of marijuana. That's what they're doing, because I've seen it.
Okay, so how does the Fourth Amendment apply if the National Guard will be patrolling the neighborhood?
For the first part, sorry, I always forget about the mic. The National Guard are not supposed to be arresting you. The Fourth Amendment's application is essentially that you're free from search and seizures without probable cause, and it has to be by police power force. So it really will happen, and the National Guard might identify you. They might see you breaking what they perceive to be that reasonable suspicion or probable cause. They'll then call ATF or somebody to actually get a warrant or actually just come down and arrest you. There are issues of, well, if ATF didn't see it, how do they create probable cause? Those will probably come up. I'll say in mine, and it might be different for everybody else up here. Most of my cases, well, maybe half, the FBI have been here. ATF has been here. I mean, there's an FBI office here. The IRS is here. United States Postal Service has some of the scariest agents I've ever seen in cases. So they all have been here. The problem is the influx in numbers that we haven't seen. The FBI has been boosted by huge numbers, not just from the Memphis office really recruiting or anything, but Nashville, Knoxville, Jackson, Mississippi, Little Rock, who are sending in their FBI agents. FBI, we know there's the joke if you drive over the river, the West Memphis police will arrest you, but the Memphis police have to leave you alone. The FBI don't have that same limitation. They're not hired by, there's not an Arkansas FBI. So even though Memphis has a group, they have brought in other agents. But to go back to your question, and I'm sorry for being long-winded on that, your Fourth Amendment right will apply when they don't have probable cause. And it's only for that either arrest, search, or seizure. So if they just detain you, you can try to say there's a seizure argument. That would normally happen. You would sue them in that 1983 context. I will say that if you are seized for an impermissible amount of time by a guard, you might be able to challenge it in criminal court. What really ends up happening, though, and I want to say, and this is why I think some of my Fourth Amendment advice for you, especially with the car, just really doesn't freaking matter, is because there's so much, I think something I was talking about earlier, the law is not always about right or wrong, it's really about processes. There's basically attenuated circumstances and things where harmless error, where a court will just be able to listen to that anyways. So I would say tread lightly on a lot of this stuff. Did that, yeah.
Just as a follow-up, just out of curiosity, in the state of Tennessee, doesn't the Constitution allow for a citizen's arrest? So is that guardsman not considered a citizen? And I think it says, I mean, I'm not an attorney, if they witness what they consider a public offense, they're not right?
That's essentially what's happening with the guard.
Right.
The guard is just reporting. I don't think they have detention powers. You can correct me on that.
So they can detain, but they can't arrest.
Yeah, they cannot arrest, but they can hold you just like any other citizen could hold you until the authorities arrive. So it's essentially a citizen's arrest. But just bear in mind though, the military is trained one way and local law enforcement is trained another way. So they could potentially get a little aggressive, but I think that the bigger threat to safety, if there's one, comes from law enforcement versus the military.
Were there any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes.
Okay, so the last question that I have is when they are pulling you over and say if it's a male and a female is in the car, they ask you to step out. They want to ask you say, oh, I smell weed in here, can you step out of the car?
I'm not aware that when you're arrested that someone of the opposite gender cannot search you. I'm not aware of that.
There's one silly thing about this. The one benefit of having Homeland Security here is in their notice and comments for rules. If you're a weird nerd like me and go on regulatory announcements for what agencies do, Homeland Security actually does have that. That's why TSA has to do it, but nobody else has to do it. That's just a weird. So if I haven't seen Homeland, although you have seen Homeland recently.
They were on the scene on the case I had today. They didn't do the physical arrest, but they were on the scene.
So if you see a Homeland person, you can request it from them.
Not as far as officers that still allow to search you, Charles.
Yes, sir. So this has just started this week. I think they just came on the 29th of September. So since Monday, I've seen, and this is just me, I've seen 3 or 4 since Monday. And so, and I'm just working with juveniles. So I'm not even sure how many adults have been subjected to this, but I know driving through the city, I've seen a lot more people pulled over, a whole lot more people pulled over. Yeah. Pastor,
Yes, I just want to, hey, thank y'all.
the other pastor. Yes.
And I just want to circle back a little bit to like there's a certain presumption on the front end in terms of the conversation we're having. And that is that students or citizens will make it home if they comply. I'm curious if y'all have seen a different kind of attitude from law enforcement and prosecutors since there's a new Department of Justice. And it's less likely for some of the officers to be held accountable for some of those egregious and excessive force kind of cases. Have y'all seen it? And maybe I'm a little bit presumptuous.
I do a lot of work in excessive force, and I used to do a lot of 1983 work. You know, this was a few years ago. I represented a young man's family who was killed in Arkansas by authorities. The authorities had told him to stop. He was carrying a brown bag. He kept walking. The authorities say stop. He said, "I'm almost home. You cannot stop me. You can't stop me. You don't have a right to stop me." He continues to walk. The officer says, "Hey, shut the fuck up, stop." Officer then continues to speed walk. My client got scared and started to jog. Officer tackles him, and then there is a confrontation. My client tried to take the officer's gun away because he was scared that he was going to be shot. The officer shoots him. He falls to the ground, and then the officer executes him in the back of the head. That was under the previous administration. I want to say that a lot of local authorities, they don't care who the president is. There might be some vivacious spirit by certain federal authorities who feel like they can be vindicated and will be more harsh. I have not explicitly seen that yet. I will say the one thing that heartens me, and I don't know about, I'll open to all of you. All of you, I'm sure, have seen the James Comey indictment, the former FBI head. That was laughable, I'll say. Many of you probably have heard about the fellow who threw a ham sandwich at the agent in D.C. It's been heartening to me to see grand juries not move to indict individuals. The old joke was you could indict a ham sandwich because the prosecutor would just bring in FBI agents or whomever who would tell their story. They wouldn't show body cam footage or anything like that. And it would be over and your client would be indicted. And now the one thing that gives me slight hope is forgetting the political situation that people maybe actually somewhat give a shit. And they will read whatever an officer or somebody brings before them. And I think that's been an accumulation of multiple instances, Tyree Nichols being one of those. But people now and you ought to, everyone should question, maybe not in the moment, but question later authority. And just know that when our arguments are the same today that we were having in 1776, the government is made up of people like all of us. Okay, when you're in a situation or you think of something, we are not always right. We're fallible human beings. And question these things, argue about these things, write about these things. That's, that stuff is important. And it actually means something. And there have been, great many opinions. I'll tell one of my favorite stories. John Adams is one of my very favorite founding fathers. He represented the Boston soldiers after the Boston Massacre, and they killed Americans. And he said, everyone's entitled to a defense, no matter what. Later, that same man became president, and he decided to arrest all the media that was against him. So people change, okay, and people are not always right. And Thomas Jefferson then wrote about how that was a violation of the First Amendment. So we're having similar arguments that we had a long time ago. And I implore you to not forget things, to read things, to write things. And everybody has something to learn to do. But this little pamphlet that I threw on the ground somewhere, those 10 things attached to the Constitution are so vitally important for you and me.
You all have been incredibly gracious, generous.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.